Welcome to Off Watch, our weekly interview series. So far in this series, we've heard a lot from the sailors about what they're doing as we count down to the start of the next edition in 2022. But what about the others? What about the onboard reporters? Well, my guest this week is James Blake. He was an OBR in the last edition and was on board with Team AkzoNobel, Vestas 11th Hour Racing and Turn the Tide on plastic. And he's finding some incredible ways to keep himself entertained, namely taking half an America's Cup catamaran and an emergency kite from a VO65, something I didn't even know existed, and putting them together to try and build a new type of ocean-going boat. Also, he talked to me about what it was like to try and interview those sailors when they're at their lowest point in the Southern Ocean. If you enjoy this interview, you can subscribe to our channel for many more. And in the comments below, leave us an idea as to who you want us to interview next time. Enjoy. Some people get to experience the race as fans, possibly from miles away. Some people on the shore, perhaps watching friends, family competing in the race. Some people get to do it for real. Now, James Blake has done all three. As a 3-year-old, he was there when his father, Sir Peter Blake, won in incredible style in the 89-90 edition onboard Steinlager 2. And he said that his father told him that you cannot put your elbows on the table until you have gone round Cape Horn. Well, for the 2018-19 edition, James Blake did that. He rounded the planet as an onboard reporter for the race. There, in the roughest of the conditions, camera and notebook in hand. James, thank you for talking to me today. You didn't get your position as an onboard reporter for the race because of your heritage. I mean, you've been there doing extreme and adventurous wildlife reporting, from some quite incredible locations. But I wonder, what's it been like in the setting of the race, in sailing in general, with your father's legacy still burning so strong?
Well, I think for me, it was something as a young kid that I was always actually quite nervous about, even in oppies and stuff. When you go out sailing and you have your dad there on the shore, it was quite that was quite a big thing to have watching you, I guess. So I always kind of shied away from kind of dinghy racing and stuff, and I'd prefer to go windsurfing or kite surfing, something that was a bit more my own. And I think after he was killed, and a few years later, is where I started to get back into sailing, from just to experience it. And the Volvo for me was just such a good opportunity to put together what I'd done as a cameraman and to get back into a bit of the sailing world, for me to experience a bit of what he experienced. And he spent so much of his life doing this race, and not just the race, but so much of his life at sea. So that was something that was really quite special for me to go out and to, meet with these other sailors that, Dad was obviously had a big influence on some of them. Some of them even sailed with him. So it was, that was something that was quite special.
Was there anything that made maybe something that made a little bit more sense when you were out there and you could see it? Was there something you thought, yeah, this is what he used to talk about. This is what I could see that light burning in his eyes.
Yeah, I think it definitely was. I mean, the first 24 hours, 48 hours, especially when it was rough, is always pretty miserable, I think, because you're having to try and send off these films straight away, and you're just chucked right into it. And for this edition, sometimes with a new crew. But then after that, you really kind of get into it, and being at sea, whether it's a storm or flat calm water, and being with a good crew, you could, I started to get an idea of why he loved being out there so much, and why he did what he did.
Well, you say you weren't initially into sailing, maybe, or competitive sailing at least, but you've been out there, on some pretty cool adventures. I mean, one of the ones when I was looking into your backstory, one of the ones that really stood out for me is, I mean, let's just say you're not afraid of a little bit of hardship. 4 people in a very small boat rowing, the across the Tasman Sea, double the length of the Sydney Hobart, from Sydney Harbour Bridge to Auckland. What was this, 51 days? That's got to toughen anybody up.
Yeah, it's 51 days land to land and 54 days down to Auckland. And first of all, ocean rowing is I'd say quite an odd sport and something that I wouldn't have probably seen myself doing when I was a bit younger. And during it, I probably didn't like it that much. You go through such highs and lows, and just like on the Volvo, you go through highs and lows. But the rowing was something else, especially the Tasman Sea, because we kept getting pushed back just by storm after storm after storm. And there's nothing you can do in a rowboat. You just got to put out a sea anchor and sit there.
Well, I mean, wasn't there a point, correct me if I'm wrong, but sort of early on in this trip where you were spending 3-4 days hunkered down in the bow and the stern cabins while the sea sort of raged away?
Yeah, so there's 2 cabins at each end of the boat that's kind of just bigger than a coffin, I'd say. You can just about squeeze 2 people in there. And the longest time we had crammed in there was 9 days. And that was a horrid time. We had 9 days, 5 days, 4 days, and then another 4 days, and then 3 days in there, just being pushed backwards. And you could just watch yourself on the track, you're going back, and then you'd row for 3 days, just get past that point, hit another storm, go back again. So that was a very interesting experience. And I learned a lot about myself, I think, doing that. I
mean, in your coverage of the race, does something like that give you a perspective that you can apply? Because we hear a lot about the sailors and we hear about how tough it is, but obviously you are central to conveying that to us when we're watching from the shore. You're putting a camera in someone's face. Does it help that you go, look, I know what this is like. I know how this can feel,
I guess it's slightly different, that competitive kind of nature that the sailors have. For us, we weren't racing. We were we got the unassisted record during the row, but we weren't racing anyone. So there was a slight difference there. But as far as being in a kind of a cramped environment, I think it helped me a little bit. And anything that starts a good conversation with the sailors, that when you're not filming, and then, it sometimes can open them up a little bit more for when you do start filming, if they know that you've gone through an experience like that.
There's a lot more adventures that you've had and some that you're still working on. I want to come to those. But before I do, let's talk a little bit then about that last edition and interviewing those sailors. What was it that made it clear to you, I want to be there on the boat and I want to be documenting this? Was it a case of, well, I've done all this years as, working on cameras, working on oceanography, or was it the pull of sailing and, what your father had meant to you?
I think it was a little bit of both. I mean, at the end of the day, it was a job for me. But I think once, and I actually wasn't too sure about it, in all the training and the build-up period, it was, I wasn't too sure how I was going to get on with it. But then once the race started, that's when it really, I think probably the first leg was okay. Then kind of towards the middle of the second leg, that big leg down to Cape Town, that's when I really felt, actually, I'm going to enjoy this. I know it's going to be tough, but I can, I know I'm going to keep on board. Yeah.
What was the biggest thing that you had to learn then in that training period? Because it seems like, well, if you can descend into a cave on the Galapagos Island, or, you can kind of film with sharks, you can handle a 65.
I think it's dealing with the crew and, quite a lot of the things I film, you go there and, the presenter or whoever you're filming has signed up for that job. They know what they're going to be doing. You can repeat things, you have that time. So a big challenge was to get to know the crew enough so that, they had a bit of trust in you, so that you could start to get kind of some more interesting questions sometimes. and have a good time. You want to be able to get on with the crew. Otherwise, no one's going to have a good time on board. So, yeah.
How often did you get rebuffed by the sailors when they just weren't in the mood?
Not that often. I think, occasionally, when maybe you're pushing something too hard, it's best just to leave it and walk away. Most of the guys, are very good, and, they're professionals. And, they know they've signed up for that. So actually most of the time it was fine. Maybe some of the older boys, threw up a little bit to start off with, but, once you're actually in there sailing, they see what you can do or see what you're doing. Hopefully they open up to you.
Because I was talking to Chris Nicholson about this, and I think it must be amazing for all the sailors and for yourselves as well. We all do that thing where we realize, I had a photograph of that day, or, that holiday or whatever. And there's all this stuff about this amazing adventure that all the sailors have been on. So I hope now they kind of look back on, and we hear an awful lot about what the sailors have to do, how little sleep, how, much hard work, the temperatures and everything. What was it that you were having to deliver? Because it wasn't just take some nice pictures if you can, was it?
No, it's, I think, well, first of all, the sailors were on that 4 hours on, 4 hours off, and we were kind of floating, doing our own thing. So I think we definitely had it a lot easier there. But it was trying to push, obviously there's quite a lot asked of you as far as what you as a cameraman want to produce and send out that day. And then also you have to send out stuff for sponsors, for the team, for mixing. So it's trying to juggle everything, so that you weren't annoying the crew with filming too much or asking too much of them, but also you're getting enough for that output. And the first thing, a main thing, is you're trying to tell that story of what's going on the boat, and then within the kind of the overall big picture of the race.
And you put in all that effort and you collect all this amazing footage, and then, let's be fair, it kind of gets washed through a system where your name, your stamp kind of gets removed, and it sort of gets put out by the team or by the race. I'm wondering if, are there any shots that you see popping up still and you'd like to kind of go, that one was mine, I was the guy that did that one? Was there any ones that stand out?
I think as a cameraman, you always like seeing, your shots being used. But at the end of the day, it's a job. So, like any other of my jobs, usually you film and then you give them footage, and you might be able to touch it a couple of years later for a show reel, possibly. But other than that, you'll be watching it on TV or online or whatever. So that wasn't too much of an issue.
Because you did have some fun. I mean, it was interesting that you did manage to get the team to sort of buy into some stuff. I mean, I think we can all say now that for those people that were following the race, one of the things that you were well known for, you got a good reputation for, and looking back at your history, you can see why, drone flying. And you, on board Turn the Tide on Plastic, released a video for flying the drone through the boat. And I think we can say that, this was some clever trickery on your part. But for little things like that, there's not a lot of wind. Whose idea was it? Where do you sort of go, oh, guys, look, let's all get together on this?
Well, I'd kind of wanted to do it, and I think maybe a few of the OVRs had talked about it just for a bit of fun. And I was going to do it with Axo Noble on one of the legs, but we just never had the right conditions, and it just happened with Turn the Tide. And they were such a good crew to be with, kind of young, full of energy, so that anything that you were asking, as long as you weren't slowing the boat down or putting them out too much, they were very happy to help with. And the sailors love drones, and I think they're kind of all waiting for it to crash, possibly. That's probably their main excitement that they're trying to get. But that was a good bit of fun, a little bit of cinema magic, I'd say. But
okay, well, yeah, that's perfect. We'll leave it at that. Because, like you say, I mean, all of the sailors at the end, I think they all realise how wonderful it is to have this record. You guys, as the OBR, you weren't meant to, and correct me if I've got this wrong, but you weren't meant to have any favourites. The plan was to move you guys around the boats so that you wouldn't get too friendly with the teams, so that I'm guessing you could still stay kind of objective. How easy is it to remain objective when you're on a boat with only these people for potentially 21 days?
It's tricky, and I think it's, I think it's changing for the next one. So I don't know if they'd ever go back to that again, just because of some of the conflicts that came up, I'd say. But I think you've got to stay kind of a little bit away from the team, but you need to, first of all, and from my point of view, to get really kind of involved as you can, because otherwise the team don't open up to you. You've got to kind of become quite friendly with them if you can, so that they, as I said before, there's a bit of trust about what you're trying to do. But it was definitely a tricky one going in between boats, and especially if you were changing from leg to leg to leg. That was, it could be a little bit confusing, I guess. That was from both parts, from the sailors and from us as the OBRs. That was a very odd one. And, some boats you'd get on better with the crew, some boats not so much. And depending on who the OBR was or whatever, but it was definitely, I'm really glad I got to do that, because you got to meet so many of the crew members. We had a bit more flexibility when we got ashore, because we weren't with the team, and we weren't, there wasn't that much going on. So sometimes, not all the time, obviously, but it was quite nice.
And what was it like, when it wasn't nice? When it wasn't a fun interview that you had to do, that you knew that, we've lost a few miles here or something's happened, but the camera's going to have to come out and the interview's going to have to take place?
It would depend on the sailor. No one ever kind of said, no, can we, you get the odd moment, oh, can we just do this later, which is fine. And that's something that you have to respect. But, some of the sailors, were very open about that, which was really nice. And that's when you got some great stuff, is if they were a bit frustrated. But if you had a bit of trust there and you got on with them, then they would open up to you, even if they were, they might have been a bit grumpy or a bit angry. I think as long as you don't take it personally, it's not against you, then you'd actually get some really, really great stuff.
And what was the hardest bit, the hardest sort of task for you? Was it getting out of your bunk? Because as you say, you're on your own watch system, you are your own boss, you've got to produce this stuff for the office, but essentially you can go, laptop's dead. Was it getting out of your bunk? Was that the hardest bit? Or was it keeping all of your electronic equipment, drones, cameras dry in these unbelievably wet boats?
A little bit of both, really. The equipment after kind of the second, third leg, we're getting quite good at getting into that routine of, cleaning it and maintaining it. At the end of the leg, there was always a little bit of a flurry of all your gear going into one bag as you're trying to get off the boat. So that was a bit of a sort out. But I think the hardest part, especially, these sailors are working so hard, doing their 4 hours on, 4 hours off, especially in the Southern Ocean. And, actually it's quite tiring to get up, get changed, get your camera out, put it in the underwater housing, put on all your wet weather gear, get outside, try and do an interview, take a few shots, get back down, start editing, something's happened, you've got to go back up. So there's just a bit of, you're moving all over the place, but it was, at the end of the day, it was really exciting.
I'm sure you loved it, but there's some real hardship there that I personally just can't quite get over. Being on deck we've seen all the videos of the water coming over and, physically, bruised. That's horrible. But personally, I think I'd rather be there in the cold and in the wet than that incredibly cramped corner that they put you in trying to, edit videos on a laptop ready to be broadcasted, that day. Do you get seasick?
I got seasick. If it was a rough start, the first 12 hours was pretty horrid. I think the first, when was it? It was coming from Cape Town to Melbourne. I remember just standing at the hatch, and I'd been trying to send off an edit. I think it was about 5 hours after the start, but we were really rough going up into the wind. And I remember just standing at the hatch trying to hit send on my laptop to send it off. But it wasn't good. And all the sailors just watching me at the hatch as I was going a bit purple and, obviously throwing up. And that's not a good thing for the sailors to see, because some of, even the hardest sailors, still quite a lot of them, and I was surprised, get seasick. So I think it's something that most people do go through depending on what they're doing. But that was horrid. But then after about, 24 hours or so, I was fine. I could sit down there all day on my laptop if I had to. But and we actually had quite a nice little seat. I thought it was all right as far as what the other sailors got. We had our own desk, which was quite nice. And that was fine. I think the hardest point, and it wasn't when you're cold or wet up on deck, they were some of the most exciting points. And maybe looking back on it now, your views change. The worst points was when something went wrong, or you were kind of going backwards, or, there's no wind or something like that. You get this slightly kind of, I do, and I got it in the row when you're going backwards, this kind of really down kind of dread feeling kind of inside you that, you've got to overcome. But it's not a nice feeling.
And I mean, you mentioned the row, you mentioned that horrible feeling of, your distances being sort of unwound. It doesn't seem to hold you back though, does it? Because you've been out there with the OBR, you did this row. One of the things that, I really, really wanted to ask you about is, you say that you're not a dinghy sailor. You didn't really want to be a dinghy sailor when you were younger. You mentioned windsurfing, kite surfing as well. So you've been involved with a really interesting project. And I just want to make sure I've got this right. You want to get a high performance, ocean going boat powered by a kite surfing kite, essentially. And I mean, you're building this now. You're developing this now.
It's been an idea. I had ideas when I was about 18 or so of doing long distance kind of kite surfing, and had some drawings that I made up back then. But me and a friend of mine for the last probably 7 or 8 years have been tinkering with this idea. We've every time we go out, I think something's broken or we've failed. We end up upside down. Just, about a month ago, we ended up in a real big capsize. But what we've found over the last, 5-6 years or so is that those little failures have been so good for us, and we've learned so much. And we're now getting to the point where this thing is so exciting. We can hammer along. We've got a 24-foot prototype that we built a while ago, and we're just modifying at the moment. So that won't be, ocean going. It'll be out in the Solent soon enough. But then we also have got one hull of the AC-45s that we managed to get from when it was Land Rover Bar, the America's Cup team. As part of their sustainability agreement, they were either going to chop up the hull or do something with it. So we asked them if we could have it, and we managed to get this 45-foot carbon hull that we for some reason we built a keel for it, which then we went out and tested it, and that didn't work. So we're now just we're going back to our smaller prototype to experiment a bit, and we're just kind of cracking down with the control systems, and it's starting to work really well, and we keep going back to try and simplify it. We're slowly getting there. But it's been a very much a backyard project. Like, we're just building it basically in the back shed.
Fascinating. I did not realize that all of the 65s had one of these kites as a sort of a last minute backup. And when I read that, I was sort of assuming, one sailmaker made one as a sort of let's sort of try one. So really cool that something like that has been able to bounce onto a project like yours. Maybe it will bounce back as you develop a few things. I'm wondering, in terms of getting your, let's call it a craft, across an ocean, has there been anything being on board the 65s, being in part of the race? And I'm thinking mainly in terms of the safety and the security and, you know, the communication, that if something goes wrong, these are your redundancies. Has there been anything from your experience on the 65s that has stood out and you thought, yeah, I want to take that with me as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, and when I think about it, you know, going in the Southern Ocean, you know, when it's blowing 40, 50 knots, you know, at the moment, I can't imagine doing that in a boat powered by kite from the safety point of view, basically. So there's so many things that we can learn from that. And a lot of it was having conversations with the sailors about this kite boat, because they always, I think they found it quite amusing, possibly the guys that I did speak to. And, you know, it was having conversations with them about what kind of angles you're going to be doing, the safety side of it, definitely. But the safety side is such a big part for us that we've got to be able to develop it so that if, you know, the worst thing does happen, you do fall overboard, that it does dump the kite. And that's what we've just been playing with, and it seems to be working. And, you know, a few other little bits and pieces like that. But as I say, it was these little conversations that just got you thinking. And obviously there was quite a lot of time to think on the boats. But that's an important time to have.
And one of the sailors that I'm guessing you would have spoken to about it, he's an advisor, I think, for your Ocean Kite project, Tony Ray. Must be quite nice to be with somebody who not only has got this huge, I mean, I forget, is it 5 ocean races? Is it 7 ocean races? I can't quite remember. But also America's Cup and everything. And of course, you know, been sailing as well. You know, did an AC campaign under your father as well. I mean, there's a nice sort of continuation there.
Yeah, Trey's been a great help. And just that, I mean, obviously with him in New Zealand and me here, we, you know, don't get to see each other often, but when we do catch up, it's so nice. And I think that connection he had with Dad, and there's quite a few sailors like that, but Trey's definitely one in particular, that it's really nice to even just, you know, chatting with them about Dad and how he used to run things is really nice. Because when Dad was killed, I was quite young. I was 13, and it's having these conversations. And there's only a few of them that you do actually have that are really quite special. And you know, some of these old, you know, the sailors that did sail them, like Trey, have been really nice for that. And not just for the kite boat, but just for me personally. You know, apart from that in personal life, it's nice to hear about that kind of stuff. There was
a photo that I remember seeing you when you rounded Cape Horn, and I started this interview with that quote that you've attributed to your father about, you know, needing to be there and done it, and then you know actually walked the road. And there's a photo of you, I think, taking a shot of, I think it was Team Axe and Nobel as you guys come around on, but there's your big grin kind of coming into the camera as well. Did you get a chance to take some of those moments for yourself when you're on those adventures, even if you're documenting them for TV? Do you get a chance to kind of, this one's for me?
Yeah, Cape Horn was definitely a special one. It's something that I'd always wanted to do from a very, very young age. And I didn't really think about it. And then suddenly we were just there, and it was actually quite emotional, you know, the amount of times Dad had sailed around there. And he'd always told me stories about it. And, you know, it was more beautiful than what he could have described. I think it was fantastic. So it was nice to take a photo, you know, get all the photo of the crew, but then also just to put the camera down and, have a think about it. And that was definitely quite an emotional time, as it, you know, it gets you thinking, you know, what he would have been doing today, and, you know, why, and also it comes back to that thing of why he was out there, why he loved doing it. You know, there's so much wildlife, there's so much beauty, even in a huge expanse with nothing around you. It's so beautiful. Even in a storm, it suddenly gets even more intense. is, that was really special.
I remember seeing some of your videos of dolphins leaping out of the water, close to the boat. Was there any wildlife encounters that, even with everything you've done as a wildlife cameraman, was there anything that surprised you? Wow, that's big and that's pretty close to us.
Yeah, I've done, other than I've done lots of whale story. I've done lots of whale filming, lots of marine side, but I think just the albatross were, that was just so beautiful. I could sit there for days and watch them. And especially when it was Cape Town to Melbourne, when I was on Axo Nobel and they had their bad jibe and the main track blew off. So we had to sit for 2 days, I think, and fix it, which wasn't good obviously for Team Axo Nobel. But I had such a great time, because usually you're up on deck in those conditions and your camera's in a housing. It's quite hard to operate. You can't put on a telephoto lens. But suddenly you're up in this huge waves, but I could walk around quite safely and get these shots that I could have never dreamt of. So that was a really special moment.
Is there something like that? You've just triggered a thought in my mind that I don't know what it would be like to be, let's say a war correspondent or something like that, where you're really in something with it's simultaneously, this is exciting and very noteworthy, but also quite scary. When the track went and, the footage from Axo Nobel, the sails are getting washed overboard. And I'm sure the sailors, well, the ones that I've spoken to anyway, were saying that they were all on it. But the heart rate must increase. Your first thought, is it, I better frame up here? Or is it a case of, hang on a second, I'm not exactly where I want to be?
I think it's, because it was quite early onto the leg, I think I was definitely like, right, let's get the story, let's find out what's going on. But then you yourself, you're on the boat, so that you don't quite know, how long the repairs are going to take, if they can repair it. So you're also going through this slightly kind of down point that you can see all the crew are kind of going through. So that is definitely quite tough. But from that experience, what was really nice, and that it's quite a good team when it happens, is obviously there was a bit of depression to start off with, like maybe 5 minutes of everyone being quite quiet. But then suddenly a little bit of a plan was formed. Then the humour comes back about 10 minutes later. And then it's just straight back onto it. And actually, that's when it becomes quite special. You get that kind of quite exciting tingling going on. And from just where you are in the middle of the ocean, that is really exciting. And it definitely gets your heart rate up.
Well, on behalf of everybody that enjoyed being able to live that moment without being there, thanks very much for sort of documenting that. I know you're actually about to jump off onto a shoot, so I'll just ask you sort of one final question. And it's something that I always wonder with the sailors, where they're so competitive with each other and they're, tugging at each other and trying to steal the techniques from each other. That might be a bit of a strong word, but you know what I mean. With the OBRs in the last edition, obviously you weren't embedded in a team. They were your friends, potentially, certainly by the end of the race, but they weren't your co-workers. Was there an atmosphere of, I'm competing with these other OBRs because obviously, naturally, you want your stuff to be the best? Or was there a case of, look, guys, you're the closest person I've got to a co-worker, and you're my company out here for thousands of miles in any direction? How was that relationship?
I think most of the time the relationship was quite good. When you got back into port, it was so nice to see the other guys, to see how their experience was. And that's when you were colleagues. And there was obviously a competitive nature, but you need that to push each other with anyone. But what was quite nice at sea was that we could actually chat to each other over our media computers. So we had basically like a messenger service, which was very funny. And sometimes when you're feeling a little bit down, maybe you weren't getting on, quite well or whatever, you'd suddenly have a chat with one of the guys and you'd be talking nonsense, and that was great actually, and that was a bit of a lifeline sometimes, especially as you weren't, as you say, we weren't embedded with a single team, so that it was nice having, you knew that these other guys were going through the same, guys and girls going through the same. It's something that once you did get to shore, it was great to chat about, and you've gone through the same experience together.
Well, I'm looking forward to your many more experiences. It's interesting looking at, the credits to your name and thinking, oh, I've seen that program. Oh, I didn't realize that was James Blake. So for the ones that I know about, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to watch. And for the ones that I haven't yet discovered, I'm looking forward to those as well. And let me know when you take your big FIHO 65 kite to the Solent, and I'll come down and watch.
Yeah, we'll do. Fantastic.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
My thanks to James for giving us an insight as to what it's like being out there in those conditions, but on the other side of the lens. Now, if you enjoyed this interview, you can subscribe to our channel. And next week, we have something rather special. It will be 47 years to the day since the ocean race started back in 1973, originally named the Whitbread Round the World Race. And we have a very special story to tell. You won't want to miss it.